Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, hello everybody. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Love Show. Shane Kohler here. It's a pleasure to be on with you today. I am live on Instagram again today. It's been a couple weeks since I've been live. I was traveling for my sister's wedding and I was running the 7-day Conscious Love Challenge, which by the way, as we're getting started here, I do want to announce that we are going to be running the challenge again at the end of this month. This is August right now. So we're going to be starting the next challenge at the end of August. And if you're interested in joining us for the challenge, you can go to inspiredloveapproach.com/challenge. And you can join the challenge there. I'm looking forward to doing another round. It was actually really, really great. We had a lot of fun. It was awesome. It was my first time doing a challenge. We got Alexandra on here she was in the challenge last time. She said the 7-day challenge was awesome. Sign up. So there you go. Alexandra was with us. We had a bunch of really great people in there and it was so much fun. So definitely, if you were not part of this last challenge, join us at the end of August. We're going to have a great time. It's very powerful. What I'm doing is I'm taking pieces of my Inspired Love program and kind of giving you some of the core insights over the course of 7 days. And it's really powerful and it's a lot of fun and it's free. It won't always be free, but we did the last one for free. We're doing the next one for free. So get in while it's free, that's a great time to get in. Anyway, in today's episode, we're going to be talking about a man's journey to commitment. And when I talk about a man's journey to commitment, I think what I want to say about that is it is often distinct from a woman's journey to commitment. I think in the way that we are brought up within our cultures, in the way that these ideas are kind of impressed upon us, in the influences that we get from the peers that we're with and the adults and the other people in the culture. And I mean, in so many different ways, these journeys to commitment are so distinct. And I think one of the biggest reasons that more relationships don't take off, a lot of people meet, a lot of people connect, but not very many relationships actually take off. And I think one of the biggest reasons that not so many relationships take off is because that, men are kind of on one path and women are kind of on another path, and men are expecting women to be more on their path and women are expecting men to be more on their path. And there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of people taking things kind of personally. And, when someone's not really on my path or they don't really understand where I'm at, we can often take that as a personal thing where, something's wrong with me. Why don't they want me? Why aren't I more lovable or more attractive or whatever? And, I'd say in most cases, it really has nothing to do with any of that. It's just simply two people being kind of on two different trajectories and not really being able to understand or know how to relate with the other person's trajectory. And I also want to presence, as I start today's conversation, that, even when I say women and men, I'm being very general when I say that. And I think there's a certain way that a lot of men are, and there's a certain way that a lot of women are. But I also want to say that some men operate more like women in this dynamic, and some women operate more like men in this dynamic. So I'm being very general, and I kind of have to be general just to get these ideas across. But I think like there are exceptions to every rule. Let me put it that way. There are exceptions to every rule. And what I want to try to convey today is certain principles that we can start to understand and recognize when we're dating someone, when we're in the earlier stages of a relationship, or even, a year or maybe 2 years in sometimes. Like there are certain principles that are present. And often, today we're going to talk about them as though certain principles are present in men and certain principles are present in women. But if we can start to just recognize these and understand what they are and understand how to relate to them, that's going to empower us in our ability to communicate with each other and our ability to clarify where the other person is and what they really want, in knowing what steps to take and what steps not to take, and all of the above, right? And so this conversation is really about understanding these principles and understanding when you're confronted or when you're experiencing these principles, how do you relate with them? And what I want to say, and I said this earlier, but I'll just reiterate it as we're getting started, is that when it comes to commitment, I think men have a certain journey to get there and women have a certain journey to get there. And a lot of times men are expecting women to think and feel about it the way that they do, and vice versa. Women are expecting men to think and feel about it the way that they do. And something I hear a lot, and I hear this a lot probably because my audience is 90% women and probably because I coach a lot of women, but I hear a lot the idea that there are no good men out there. And if my audience was 90% men and I was primarily coaching men, I would probably hear that there are no good women out there. Right? Because I know this conversation goes both ways. And I want to acknowledge that, look, there are those certain people out there that maybe they're highly narcissistic. I mean, there are a small amount of people out there that are actually sociopathic, where they just have no emotional capacity at all. There are these people in the world, but these people are actually a very small amount of people. And yes, you can encounter them, right? And when you encounter these people, and there are men who are like this and there are women who are like this, and when you encounter these people who are sometimes highly toxic in their relational patterns and the ways that they show up and the things that they do and the things that they say, it can be a little bit of a dangerous situation. And so I just want to start by acknowledging that there are some people out there that are a little bit dangerous to be involved with. And when you encounter someone like this, this is why it's so important to have some personal boundaries and to have certain standards that you don't really deviate from. Because when you encounter someone who's a narcissist, or when you encounter someone who maybe even more than a narcissist might be borderline sociopathic or something like that, if you have certain standards and boundaries that you don't deviate from, it's going to create an environment where that person is going to reveal themselves. But if somebody starts love bombing you and you become so like, oh my God, about being love bombed by someone because they're saying everything you want to hear and they're, doing all these perfect things, and you start to deviate from your standards and deviate from your boundaries because somebody's love bombing you, well, now you're putting yourself in a dangerous position, because those standards and those boundaries are meant to protect you. Now, that's really a whole different conversation. I'm not going to go too much into that today. But I just want to preface that as we jump into today's conversation, because what I'm going to say is largely there aren't really a bunch of bad men in the world. There aren't a bunch of bad women in the world. And again, if you talk to a group of women, they're going to tell you there are no good men out there. If you're going to talk to a group of men, they're going to tell you there are no good women out there. That's just not true. For 90% of people, again, there are these small percentages of people that are highly, highly toxic. But for the majority of people, that's just not true. What there is there is a huge misunderstanding between these two groups of people. There are a huge amount of unconscious expectation that men place on women and women place on men. And when somebody doesn't live into the expectations we've set for them, And especially when that happens over and over and over and over and over again, it can lead to a type of belief system where we say there are no good men out there or there are no good women out there, right? When you have certain expectations that, oh, well, I expect men to show up a certain way for me. I'm speaking as a woman here, right? And if I expect men to show up a certain way for me, and time and time and time again, I get let down in those expectations. Time and time and time again, I get my hopes up and get disappointed. That can lead to a certain feeling and a certain understanding that there are no good men out there. And this same thing happens to women and it happens to men. Again, like my buddy Michael is a men's coach. He works primarily with men. And I want to address this too, because something I see from my audience who are 90% women, and I love you ladies, you're beautiful, you're wonderful. But something I often see is, why aren't men doing this kind of work? And they are. Like my buddy Michael is a men's coach. He works 100% with men. He doesn't work with any women. He has groups full of men, very similar to my groups that are full of women. Right. So just because you're a woman and you're following accounts that are geared towards women and you're seeing a bunch of women comment, it doesn't mean that there aren't men also doing this work. And if you search on Instagram and you look up men's coaches, you'll find that there are many accounts that are geared directly towards men that have hundreds of thousands of followers, that have highly engaged men, right? So I think there can be an isolation in our own perspective, and we can think that, oh, well, our perspective is the whole perspective, but there really are equal perspectives on both sides. And I know from men that I've coached that, like, I've coached a lot of men who like sincerely want a relationship, who are really, really trying to find the right woman. And they feel like all they meet are like manipulative, toxic women who just don't care, who just play games with them, who just, they friend zone them and then they go chase some asshole. Right. And so I'm not saying that women are right or men are right, but what I'm trying to illuminate is that there are equal perspectives on both sides of this narrative. And it's not that anybody's bad or wrong. It's that there's a huge amount of misunderstanding here. And so what I hope to clarify in today's episode is some of that misunderstanding. And when we talk about a man's journey to commitment, which is the topic for today, for those of you who are just joining us, and welcome. When we talk about a man's journey to commitment, men have a certain way of getting there that is very distinct from how a woman gets there. And this starts from a very, very young age. And I was thinking about this morning. It's like we give little girls Barbies and we give little boys guns. And I know there are probably some little boys who play with Barbies and there are probably some little girls who play with guns, but just as a stereotype, as a gross generalization, right? Like, think about that. What are Barbies about? Barbies are all about relationships. You have Barbie and you have Ken, and they're a couple, right? And they're together. This is how little girls are raised. And little boys are given guns and tractors and things like that, and tools of destruction and separation, right? And so I'm illustrating this because I want to point out, like, even from a very young age, the way that we are conditioned. And little girls are conditioned towards relationships, and little boys are conditioned towards independence. I mentioned my buddy Michael earlier. He's a men's coach, and he and I were having this conversation. And he was saying to me, he's like, when I think back to being a little kid, right? When I think back to being like 5, 6, 7 years old, he's like, what I dreamed about was like romancing my queen. Like I dreamed about like finding my woman and like romancing her and being in love. He goes, all this stuff about being a player and being like that didn't come till much later. That didn't come until I was in like middle school or high school. And I started getting exposed to this societal pressure of what a kind of macho man is supposed to be. And I don't know if all little boys felt that way, but like, I know I did. Right? Like that was something like when I was a little kid, there was something innate in me that was like, yeah, like the way he said it, like I dreamed of romancing my queen. Like that was something that was at the core of who I was. And I think that's at the core of who all people are to a degree. Like, I think there's something that even from a very young age, we dream of love. It's like ingrained in our DNA. And I think this is true for little boys and little girls. We dream of love. It's in the Disney movies, and the prince comes and rescues the princess, and I think the little girls dream of being that princess and the little boy dreams of being that prince. And this is something that is, it's like so innate in all people. But I think something that happens as we're being brought up is that is really fostered in girls and it's not fostered in boys. And so by the time a girl reaches adulthood, she's ready. She wants to find her partner. She wants to fall in love. She wants to ride off into the sunset. She's ready for it. But the little boy has grown up in a very different environment. And, where I just think back to like middle school and high school. And I always talk about middle school and high school. And the reason I always talk about this is because for me, in my experience, and I think this is true for most of us, is like, this is where we first learn about intimate relationships. And I think so much of our blueprint around intimate relationships that we have comes from those ages. We could say like 13 to 17, right? Like this is where we kind of get programmed with our blueprint of relationships. And unless we heal that and grow into a more mature type of relationship with it, that just sticks with us. It just carries with us. It just becomes what we know about relationships. I often say, like, when I look at a lot of the drama that happens, like that happened in my own life, that happens in the lives of people I coach, I often say that our adult relationships are basically middle school and high school relationships with much higher stakes. It's like the same kind of back and forth chaotic drama, just with much higher stakes involved. And I know a lot of you will relate to that when I say that. And so when I look at like middle school and high school, and if a girl in middle school or high school were to have a boy like commit to her and be her boyfriend, that was looked at like a status symbol. That was looked at like, wow, look at her. Like she must be awesome. That boy wants to be with her. But if that same boy commits to that girl, he's mocked by his friends, right? Like he's kind of ostracized. He's looked at as like less of a man somehow. He's looked at as like being weak. Oh, you let her get your heart. Like, oh, she's going to walk all over you. And this is something that there are reasons for this, and I'm going to get to the reasons for that. But I think it's really important just to understand in our upbringing, where women are constantly encouraged, and I'm going to say women are encouraged to get into a relationship to a toxic extent. And men are encouraged to avoid relationship to a toxic extent. You see, when I say by the time women become adults, they're ready to go, that's not necessarily healthy, right? Like it's actually, it would be a little bit healthier for a young woman to take a few years and really get to know herself and figure out who she is before she just marries someone. Right? Like that would actually probably be a healthier approach for her. And in the same way where, young men are out there often trying to play the field, trying to see how many women they can sleep with, trying to, boost their ego and all of this. Like it would be healthier for them to maybe get to know themselves a little better and figure out the kind of person they want to be and the kind of relationship they want to have. So I don't think either of these approaches are really that healthy. I think they're both toxic to a degree on opposite extremes of the spectrum. And then, by the time we get out of middle school and high school and college and we're adults in the world, we're operating at opposite ends of the pole. And this creates an incredible amount of disconnection, an incredible amount of confusion, an incredible amount of resentment. And by the time we're in our 30s, we're sitting there going, there are no good men out there. There are no good women out there. because we've had a decade, or some of us in our 40s or 50s, we've had several decades of constantly experiencing this misunderstanding over and over and over and over and over again, and we've become increasingly frustrated by it. And we can't even see anymore that most of the people in the world are good people. Most of the men are good men. Most of the women are good women. As I said earlier, there's a small handful of truly toxic people. But most of the people in the world are good people who really suck at finding each other in an intimate way. And I've spoken a lot on this show about generational trauma, and I want to just touch on it here a little bit, because this all stems from generational trauma, right? And when I talk about generational trauma, I talk about the limiting identities that were passed down from our mothers and our fathers and our grandparents to us. And there are these societal stereotypes of the woman as the mother and the homemaker, and she does the dishes and she does the laundry and she raises the kids, and the man goes out and earns the money. And look, there's nothing wrong with these roles in and of themselves, but when they're enforced through a kind of generational programming, and people aren't really choosing it out of a sincere desire for what they want in their lives, they're just kind of being brainwashed into it. That becomes very toxic, right? It becomes a prison for men and women to live in. And so when we look at the generational trauma, and men are expected to be this kind of macho, ultra independent, emotionless, warrior type person. And women are expected to be like these soft, nurturing, homemaking, ultra feminine, ultra receptive type people. And the truth is like, while those are beautiful archetypes in the right times and the right places, right? I'm not saying those things are bad entirely, but there's more to a woman than that, and there's more to a man than that. And when women step out of that role, and I know a lot of you ladies who are listening right now, you experience this. Anytime you step out of that role, you're accused of being too masculine, right? Men get intimidated by you and they try to attack you for it. I mean, like, this is what happens, right? And the same thing actually happens for a man when he wants to show his sensitivity, when he wants to be loving and warm and nurturing and kind and gentle. And actually, I remember, like, this happened to me, and I'll just share this because I know it happens to a lot of men out there. Is there was a woman that I've shared about this relationship many times on the show, but there's a woman I was dating, and I honestly think she was like a narcissist, and I'm not even criticizing her for that. I know her story. I know the trauma she came from. I can understand why she is that way. But I was in a relationship with her for almost a year, and just something that happened to me in that relationship was, first she like straight up love bombed me. And then after that, she like brought out this sensitive side in me, and I was like writing her poetry and doing all this stuff. And then one morning I like wrote her a little poem and texted it to her, and she starts making fun of me and like mocking me and like calling me names. Like, what kind of a man are you? And I say this because this is what a lot of men receive when they show their sensitive side. In the same way that a lot of women are attacked for showing a stronger side of themselves. And this is all part of the misunderstanding. This is all part of the cultural programming that we receive that makes it impossible to connect. And so, in speaking about today's topic, which is a man's journey to commitment, and I know I've kind of been going back and forth with both sides of the equation, but I want to talk a little bit about the man's journey and how he finds his way there. Because A man has to get comfortable with his more feminine side. And when I talk about his feminine side, I don't mean he's going to go wearing a dress and, putting on makeup and things like that. That's femininity. That has nothing to do with feminine energy. Those are two very distinct things. But when I talk about him accessing his feminine side, what I'm talking about is his ability to be receptive. Right? The masculine energy is the providing energy. The feminine energy is the receiving energy. And there's a vulnerability in being receptive for all of us, actually, for women too. And we live this is part of the generational trauma, is we live in a highly masculine society where the value is put on those who have something to provide. And if you have something to provide, if you have something to offer, you are seen as valuable. And if you are in a receptive mode, you are seen as weak and vulnerable and needy. Now, it's more acceptable for a woman to be in this role, societally speaking. We allow women to be in this role more than we allow men to be in it. But even a lot of women are shamed for it. And this is why a lot of women become over masculine, is because they don't want to feel that weak, vulnerable neediness. And so for a man to be able to access his receptive side, and by that I mean his willingness to receive love, to be gentle, to be soft, to be vulnerable, to be intimate. This is something that is systematically beaten out of men as they're young boys, as they grow up. Where any time a young boy shows this side of him, he's accused of being gay, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being gay, but if you're a straight boy and people are accusing you of being gay just because you're being sensitive, that sucks. That doesn't feel good. He's accused of being weak. He's ostracized from his peers. These are all the things that happen to a young boy when he shows his sensitive side. And then what happens is we reach adulthood and women are wanting men to be more sensitive, to be more vulnerable, to be more emotionally available, to admit their need for love and intimacy and connection, and to show their willingness to receive that. Women are wanting this from men without recognizing that it has never been safe for a man to show this in his entire life. Now, I'm not excusing some of the kind of screwed up things men do. And I talk to you ladies all the time. I understand so much of what you go through, of being ghosted, of being used for sex, and I'm not excusing that behavior. But I think there needs to be a certain understanding of where men are, and not to say that in you understanding where men are or why they are this way, that you should allow yourself to be hurt or taken advantage of in any way. No, actually, you understanding this is more of a reason to have stronger boundaries. Right? And so you have certain boundaries with men until men show you that it is safe for you to let some of these boundaries down. Right? So there's a certain level of men needing to earn their relationship with you. But to understand why these boundaries are important, or to understand what boundaries you even need to have, you first need to understand where men are operating from and why men are the way they are. And to be able to understand that without judgment. One of the strongest barriers to intimacy that I see in women is that they are judgmental of the way that men show up. Right? If a man is demonstrating non-committal behavior, if he's not leaning right into a relationship, if he's not more emotionally available, rather than having a certain wisdom and understanding of where that's coming from and why he's showing up that way, they judge it. They become resentful about it. And like ladies, I say this with a lot of love. If you can't be receptive to where a man is and where he's operating from, and again, this doesn't mean you let him take advantage of you in any way. But if you can't have some compassion for the journey that he's gone on as a man in his life, where it has never been safe for him to be vulnerable, to be emotionally available, to be sensitive, you're not going to have a healthy relationship with a man. And so there's a way for women, and again, I want to say that like, it's important as a woman because like, I want to be the first to acknowledge that this world is not safe for women in so many ways. And I know you ladies feel that, right? The world is not safe for women in so many ways. And so it's so important as a woman in this world to have boundaries, especially in your relationships with men. It's so important for a woman in this world when you're getting to know a man and you don't know him that well, to make sure that he earns the relationship with you every step of the way. Right? It's so important that you operate that way with men because that protects you. And if you don't operate that way with men, like you're setting yourself up to just be hurt time and time and time again. But while you want to have boundaries in your relationship with men, while you want to have a certain level in which he needs to earn his relationship with you every step of the way, you also want to have some understanding and some compassion for where he's coming from. And like, this is the thing. A non-committal man is not a bad man. He might be a traumatized man. He might be a wounded man. He might be a scared man. He might be a disconnected man. But he's not a bad man. And in fact, if so many of the, like, and look, I know, like, I'll just state some of the things that I know have happened to a lot of women, right? Like a man will sleep with you and never call you again. A man will ghost you after a few dates and not say anything about it. And this is toxic behavior. I'm not saying it's not toxic behavior. But that's generally, most of the time, it's not coming from someone who's out to hurt you. It's coming from someone who is feeling a lot of complex emotion and has never been taught how to deal with that emotion. And like, let's just say if a man sleeps with you and then doesn't call you afterwards. Well, what's probably happening for that man is he's feeling a lot of complex things. He's nervous about all different aspects of this relationship. He's never even been taught how to deal or process these emotions. He doesn't even really understand what's coming up for him. And to add maybe insult to injury, he's in a society where if he just never talks to you again, he can add a notch on his belt and be like, well, I got mine. And he's going to be applauded for that in our society. Like, I want you to see how easy it is for him to avoid the complex emotions that are coming up for him and just take that notch on his belt and get applauded by his society. And that's not even really his fault. That is a deep wounding that is existing in him and that is existing in our culture as a whole, and he's just a product of that. And this is why, ladies, I say it's important for you to be aware of the world we live in, of how men are being brought up in this world, and to have certain boundaries that you live with to avoid getting yourself into these positions. And I want to be clear, I'm not excusing that behavior. It's toxic behavior. But if you understand where so many men are coming from, and you understand this complex journey that men are on to learn to feel safe enough to be emotionally available, to be sensitive, to fall in love, to give a woman that kind of power over them. And let me be very clear. When a man falls in love, he is giving a woman an incredible amount of power over him. And this is something that most men in our society have been taught to never do. And yet they do it all the time anyway. Like, it's pretty amazing, actually, when you think about it, when men are taught to never do that, and yet they still do it all the time. That demonstrates a lot of courage, actually. And so if you can understand and be sensitive to this incredibly complex journey that men are on to actually open their hearts, to acknowledge their need for love and affection and intimacy, to be willing to put themselves in the vulnerable position of falling in love with a woman. If you can understand the incredible length it is for most men to go there in our society, and you can have a little bit of compassion for the fact that when you meet a man, he might not be ready to go there immediately. And you can engage with him in a way where you understand where he's coming from. You understand the journey he's on. You understand the complexity of what it must be like for him to open himself up in this way. You have boundaries, which means that, like, listen, you're not going to sleep with me until I feel safe going there with you. You're not going to be all up in my house or all up in my bed, or, you're not going to be occupying all of my time or all my attention. Right? Like, you have these certain boundaries that protect yourself as this man proves himself to you, as he makes you feel safe enough to open yourself up in a relationship with him. What that's going to do is that's going to invite him to open his heart to you. And all the while that you're doing that, right? So I'm talking about this balance here of being available to him, but with boundaries, while being compassionate and understanding of the journey he's on to learn to open his heart, to learn to be emotionally available, and encouraging him to go there, encouraging him to do that, letting him know that it is safe to do that, letting him know how much you appreciate it when he does do that. You are going to become someone. It's not that you are healing him, but you are a space in which he can heal. You become a safe space in which he can express all these parts of himself that he's never been allowed to express in his life. And ladies, like, I want you to know that men are craving this. Like, the amount of pain a man has to carry day in and day out to be this kind of macho guy, to be strong under all circumstances, to never cry, to never ask for help, to never be vulnerable. Like the kind of pain that he has to carry day in and day out to keep up this facade of this macho masculine man that our culture expects him to be. It's incredible. It's an incredible amount of pain he carries. And then it almost makes it worse when he meets someone that he actually could theoretically see himself opening up to. And then she's pushing for levels of the relationship that he's not ready for. And she's going, why can't you be this for me? Why can't you be that for me? Why aren't you ready yet? And he wants to go there, but he's just not really able to at this moment in time. And then he feels the judgment of that. It makes it harder for him to open up. It makes it harder for him to become vulnerable. And I know what a lot of women are going to say to this, and I hear you on this, is you're going to say, well, what, am I just supposed to wait forever? Am I just supposed to be a constant, unconditional space for his avoidant behavior while I just wait and wait and wait and wait? And the answer is no. And this is where, like, my advice to women on this is that this is where you need to be connected to your truth and your intuition. And you can be this space for a man until your heart, until your soul, until your truth says, I can't do it anymore. And you see, I think in the way that the masculine journey is to really learn to open himself up and access his heart, access his sensitivity, access his emotional reality, to be more emotionally available. I think the feminine journey is almost the opposite in a way. It's to, without closing her heart, and I'm not saying to become closed-hearted, that doesn't help anyone. But without closing her heart, it's to become this space where she has strong boundaries, where she can stand in her truth, where she can stand in her authenticity, where she can learn that just because there's a connection, it doesn't mean that it's meant to last forever. She can also learn that when a connection ends, it's not a bad thing, right? Like if you started dating a man and maybe you dated for 6 months and the relationship got to certain levels, and once it got to certain levels, he started to withdraw. He started to pull away. He started to become unavailable for the levels at which you wanted to go in the relationship. And maybe you went back and forth with this for a while. And there was some arguing and there was some fighting and there was some, I want you to, why can't you? And I want to, but I can't. And, there was kind of this back and forth here. And then at a certain place, maybe in your heart, you say, I've given this relationship everything I can. I can't give it anymore. I care about you. I love you as a human being, but you have not earned what I'm willing to give. And so this is the end. And to be able to understand that that's not actually a bad thing. Maybe you doing that is going to be the lesson he needs to ultimately heal. Like maybe as long as he had you in his life, he couldn't really heal. Because to a degree, as long as he had you, it was enabling that non-committal behavior. But actually losing you was the final lesson he needed. And he goes, oh my God, like, I don't want to lose someone like that again. I better really like get ready to open myself up. Like maybe that was exactly what he needed. And maybe at the same time, something you needed in that interaction was to learn to let go a little more. Maybe something you needed in that interaction was to learn that not every connection needs to last forever and that it's okay when it doesn't. Maybe you could use some practice in releasing with love without going and saying, oh, he's such an asshole and everything I gave him, how could he not return it to me? And maybe you needed to learn how to say, you know what, he was a wonderful person. We shared some amazing things together. It just wasn't the right time for us. And I know there's something better out there for both of us. And I would like to suggest that most of the relationships that don't work out for us the way we want them to are not bad, toxic relationships. They are exactly what we needed for our growth at that time. Now, I gave the caveat earlier. I'm going to give the caveat again. There are some toxic, destructive people out there that will just destroy you if you get involved with them. Those people do exist, but it's a very small percentage. Most people are not bad people. And I think something that we all need to learn a little more is to be open enough to explore relationships as far as they are able to go. And when they can't go any further, to release them and trust that there is something better. And that this is not a bad thing when it happens. It's a beautiful thing, actually. It doesn't mean it's not sad. It doesn't mean you're not going to grieve the loss. It doesn't mean that, you won't go through a season of maybe crying over that person, but why are we, this is where you've got to ask yourself, why are we so averse to heartache? Why are we so afraid to just experience some pain sometimes? This is a very shallow level of approaching life where we just want it to be all good all the time and never bad. But that's not even life, right? Like life is the full range of experience. And a healthy, integrated individual is not someone who's just happy all the time. It's someone who has the ability to fully experience the full range of their experience. And I think some of what our relationships are teaching us, because nothing really touches us the way intimate relationships do. And some of what our relationships are teaching us is to get more comfortable being with the full range of who and what we are in its totality. Not just saying, I like these aspects of myself, I don't like these aspects of myself, and I just want to get all the good and none of the bad. And I want to say this too, your ability to learn this when you're dating or when you're in more casual relationships is only preparing you for the deeper level of it that's going to come in a long-term committed relationship. Like I've been with my wife 8 years now. In that time, we've gone through 3 years of long distance. So we were living on opposite ends of the country for 3 years. That's not easy, right? Then we moved in together 3 years after being long distance. And immediately the pandemic happened and we went into lockdown. So if you could picture this, we went from living on opposite ends of the country to living in a 1,500 square foot apartment in lockdown together. That was not easy. Like, talk about going from one extreme to another. Then after that, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And we went through basically like 2.5 years of her treatment and recovery. That was not easy. Like, let me tell you, and I know not all relationships have been as front loaded with challenges as ours have. But what I have experienced in the last 8 years with my wife has been more challenging than anything I ever experienced while I was dating. And even if not all relationships are as front loaded as ours have been, those challenges come through all relationships, right? Like, if you're with someone for life, you're going to go through all the ups and downs and everything you can possibly imagine with that person. And so the challenges that you experience in your more casual relationships are only preparing you for the deeper level that you're going to go to in your long-term committed relationship. For those of you who are seeking that. And so what I want to say today is that for the women who are looking for a relationship with a man, and I understand there may be all different versions of that out there. There may be men who are looking for a relationship with a man. There may be women who are looking for a relationship with a woman, right? But even if you're a more feminine partner looking for a relationship with a more masculine partner, in whatever way that might look, those of us in our world who have taken primarily a masculine role, something that comes with that is a disconnection from our emotional availability, is a disconnection from our sensitivity. And if you want that relationship to work, or if you want a relationship to work at some point in your future, something you are going to have to develop is an understanding and a compassion for that person's journey, and a willingness to be patient with them as you create a safe space for them to open their heart to you. And to be able to do that without judging them as wrong for it, without making it bad, the journey that they're on. You know, I know this growing up as a boy, and I know who I was in my early 20s. And fortunately, I got into healing work at a very young age, and I found the gifts in opening myself up, and you know that was I was very blessed in that way. But I know who I was when I was younger. I know the thick walls of arrogance and righteousness and emotional unavailability that I had. And I know what I had to do to get free of that. And I see it even now with my wife. I mean, I think, you know, compared to where a lot of men are, I'm probably a little ways ahead of that. But I see it in my relationship with my wife. There's just often an unwillingness to be sensitive. Feeling like I have to be this strong, unpenetrable person. And this is largely the masculine wound that men in our world are seeking to heal. And what we need from women in the world is an understanding and a compassion around that, so that we feel safe enough to heal from it. And when we're judged for it, all we do is close down. All we do is shut ourselves down even more. Okay, so thank you everybody for being with me in that conversation. It was fun exploring this with everybody today. I get on here, I don't always know exactly what I'm going to say, but I just kind of jump on with an idea and let it flow. But I hope that was powerful, and I hope that was supportive for many of you. I do want to open up for some questions now. If you have questions around today's topic or really around anything we can discuss, go ahead, drop them in the comments, and I'll take as many questions as we can. I'm going to start with Ashley D's question. Any tips of leaving and letting go gracefully? I find it so difficult to do. So any tips of leaving and letting go gracefully? I find it so difficult to do. It is difficult. And so let me start there. And as I talk about these things today, I don't intend to say that any of this is easy, right? It's not easy. It's hard. It's hard, right? Like that's just the simple truth of it. It's hard. I would say it gets easier as you practice, but I think it's also really dependent on the situation. Like, for example, if my wife were to leave me today, no matter how good I might have been at it in the past, that would be devastating for me. That would be a long healing process for me. And so it's not easy. It's never really easy, but you can get more comfortable with it. And something like, if I just take the example, if my wife were to leave me today, something I think I have now that I didn't always have is the awareness that I'm okay no matter what. And I feel so confident about that. And so even though if she were to leave and I were to experience like a soul-crushing heartbreak, I have the confidence that I am okay even while experiencing a soul-crushing heartbreak. And I think a lot of us lose ourselves in that heartbreak, right? A lot of us, when we experience a heartbreak, it makes us question our very identity. It makes us question like our very existence. It becomes like an existential issue. Like, who am I without this person? How can I live without this person? How could I have a life without this person? How could I ever move on without this person? And that is something that I do believe we can truly heal completely. It doesn't mean I'm not going to go through missing the person in a visceral way on a daily basis. I'm going to go through all those thoughts of like, oh my God, we would be having dinner together right now. We would be walking the dog together right now. We would be sitting down and watching TV together. We would be snuggling together in bed, right? Like, and having all those memories and like craving that. But I think there can be like an existential awareness underneath that, where we know in the core of our being that I am okay, that life will go on, that there is a future outside of this person. And so the tips I want to offer you, Ashley, are one, just starting to divorce the idea that letting go of someone means something about you personally, right? That I'm not enough, that I'm unlovable, that I'm never going to find what I'm looking for, that it can't happen for me, or that it means something about the world as a whole. There are no good men out there, et cetera, right? So if we can divorce what you're experiencing now from the existential meaning that we give it, That's a huge first step. Okay, this happened. I'm going through this experience. It doesn't mean anything about me inherently. It doesn't mean anything about the world. It doesn't mean anything about all men. It's just, I'm going through something right now. And I am grieving something that's happening in my life. And if we can kind of keep it where it belongs, that's a huge first step. The next step is to get comfortable with everything you're feeling around it. And grief can process quite quickly if we allow it to. There's a woman in my program who recently lost her mother. And we've been talking a lot about her process as she's been grieving her mother. And something she shared with us, and she's been grieving this very consciously. It's been beautiful to watch her process, as devastating as the experience is. And her mother and her were very close. And something she shared with us is like, yeah, there are moments of just soul-crushing grief where all she can do is just cry her eyes out in her bed. But she's been practicing allowing herself to feel these moments fully, right? To really feel 100% of this experience. And then what she's also shared is there are these moments of incredible joy. And it's like she might be crying her eyes out for 15 minutes and just deeply grieving the loss of her mother, and then just explode into a kind of like ecstatic laughter. And grief is not necessarily what we think it is, where it's just endless suffering. Like grief can be an incredible range of emotions. And what kind of perpetuates this endless suffering inside of us is when we're grieving something and we're resisting the depressing feelings around it. And so rather than allowing ourselves to go fully into the grief, we kind of resist it and we try to control it and we try to hold on to it and we try to make sure that it doesn't overcome us. And that prolongs and slows down the process of grief. And so what I want to invite you to, Ashley, in whatever way this shows up for you, whenever and however it shows up, is to like fully surrender into it. Cry when you need to cry, laugh when you need to laugh. Don't try to get it all together. Don't try to say, I'm over it already. He doesn't mean anything to me, or whatever it is. Right? Like first acknowledge how much you're being impacted by it. And let yourself completely surrender to whatever you're feeling around it. And if you do that, this is my promise to you. And like, this is really a kind of science. I don't know if it's what mainstream science is studying, but I've just observed this in so many people that I've coached through grief. Like there is evidence behind this, is that these dark, dark moments last for maybe 10, 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. When you really let yourself experience them, you move through them and then you move beyond it, and it comes in waves. And, you might experience it several times a day in the beginning. Then you might experience it a few times a week. Then you might experience it, once a month, or, and gradually you just release it. But you release it by fully experiencing these waves every time they surface. And the last thing I want to say is, as you get comfortable with grieving things in general, whether it's the loss of a loved one, the loss of a pet, the loss of a partner, as you get comfortable grieving things in life in general, the heaviness of the grief as a whole becomes less, because you now feel more empowered within it. So lots of love to you. I know it's not easy, but you're doing amazing, and thank you for the question, and lots of love. Okay, this is a great question on today's topic. This is I March Will. How not to let waiting for a man to feel turn into a situationship? So she's asking, how do I not let waiting for a man to feel turn into a situationship? Very good question. Very nuanced question. So today we were talking about being patient as a man opens up his heart. And how do I do that without letting it become a situationship? This is where you have to be really connected to your truth. You have to be really connected to your intuition. You have to sit and reflect, right? So something I often coach the ladies I coach on is, don't just see someone one day after another, after another, after another, after another. Don't like be on the phone with them or texting them 24/7. And of course, you can maintain consistent communication, but take periods in between to reflect. Start practicing getting really in touch with what you are feeling about the situation. There might come a point in the relationship where you have a conversation with him where you say, listen, I've gone as far as I can with this, right? Like, I've been patient. I've given you time to figure out what you want and where you stand. And I've reached the end of the road for me. Like, I cannot do this anymore. So I wish you the best, but this is it for us. That's how you prevent it from becoming a situationship, is by being very connected to your truth, by having your boundaries, by communicating those boundaries every step of the way. If you don't do that, if you just wait and wait and wait and things come up for you and you subordinate what you're feeling and you don't communicate it and you don't set the boundaries, that's how it becomes a situationship. And I think the biggest thing that I'm saying here, or one of the biggest things, is communication, right? So you're in tune with what you're feeling and then you're communicating about it. And then there's also some nuance here, which I can't really get into right now, but in my program, this is the kind of thing we work with, where there's some nuance between, okay, what's your own anxious attachment style that you need to learn to regulate, and what is actually an authentic thing that you need to bring and communicate in the relationship. And those are two different things. And so an important part of self-awareness is learning to differentiate what's your own anxiousness that you need to regulate and what is really a boundary that needs to be brought to the relationship. And again, I can't get into all that today, but that's something I want to offer you in terms of navigating this for yourself. But the biggest thing is to maintain your boundaries, to communicate about them, to know what your limits are. And ultimately, if he can't meet you where you want to meet within an amount of time where it fits within your limits, that's the end for the two of you. And you have to trust that if it was meant to be, that he would have been able to meet you there. So thank you for the question. Beautiful question. Really relevant to today's conversation. Thank you so much. Sharon Kaufman says, I started dating a month ago. He calls me only once a day. I don't think it's enough. I told him I need more communication, but to guess it's enough for him. I don't want him to call because it has to come from him. I do feel he really likes me. Okay, awesome. Thank you for sharing, Sharon, and I'm going to give you some insight here. So a month in, once a day, I'm not saying what's enough for you or what should be right for you, but I'm just talking in terms of like coaching many, many people and navigating a lot of these kinds of situations. 1 month in, talking on the phone once a day, maybe some text messages in between, maybe seeing each other on a somewhat regular basis once a week or once every couple weeks. That's pretty consistent and that's pretty good. So, what I'm seeing in that is someone who is being very consistent for you. Now, I think it's totally valid that you would desire more than that. I think it's also totally valid that that's enough for him. And I think it's okay to communicate about that. But what I want to contextualize for you is this person is being very consistent. So you say, I just see your comment here. You say you meet 3 times a week and you talk once a day. I mean, that's incredible consistency. That's incredible consistency. So I don't think that more than that is necessarily required 1 month into a relationship. This sounds like someone who is very interested. This sounds like someone who is making a good amount of effort to see you and to spend time with you. So again, if you want more, that's valid. And I think it's okay to discuss that and to work towards that together. But I would caution you about putting a lot of pressure on having more right now. You know, many people many people that I coach, like a month in, it would be very normal to see each other once a week or once every other week and to talk maybe 2 or 3 times in between. And different relationships take off at different paces, right? Some people are more available. Some people have more time. Some people are more ready. So it's not that one way's right and the other way's wrong, but I'm just talking in terms of norms. This is on the high end of social norms. And so I think you're off to an excellent start. I think this is an incredible amount of consistency. I don't think more is required at this stage. And I'd say, you know, in the right time, in the right place, it's okay to say, hey, you know, maybe we could talk in the morning sometimes, or, you know, I don't know if he calls you at night or whatever, but, you know, or if he calls you in the morning, maybe we could talk at night sometimes, right? Like, it would be okay to make these invitations, but I just want to caution you about pushing for a lot more right now, because this is a lot, especially at such an early stage of the relationship. And I would say maybe an alternative practice is to practice appreciating the amount of investment and consistency that he is showing you, because he's making a lot of effort, and that's beautiful. And I don't want him to feel unappreciated for the amount of effort he's making, or for him to start to feel like no matter what I do, it's not enough for her, which that is where this could go if you push for too much too soon. All right. I'm going to close it out with that, everybody. But thank you so much for being on with me today. This is the Conscious Love Show podcast. You can find us on all major podcast platforms. If you didn't catch the whole live episode today, we were talking about a man's journey to commitment. And I would love for you to go back and catch up on it. Make sure to follow us on Apple, on Spotify, on all major podcast platforms, wherever you listen to podcasts most. It's a pleasure being with you today. I will be back here next Tuesday. Lots of love, everybody. Many blessings, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @TheLivingRelationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.